Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to read a statement just because it's, I tend to go off script sometimes. So I want to take this opportunity to address the issue of my spending on council trips that has come up recently. I want to first and foremost apologize to the community, Mayor Castriota, Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf, all of my council colleagues, and our dedicated staff for my mistake that may have caused any doubts on my integrity or that of my colleagues in our city processes. Second, all amounts have been and always were intended to be fully reimbursed to CCOB. At no time were public funds used improperly, and there was never an intention to use public funds improperly. Each time that I billed hotel restaurant charges to my room, I proactively notified staff of the amounts and reimbursed the amounts in full. I misunderstood a communication from our former finance director that it was acceptable to use the P card for amounts above the per diem as long as those additional charges were reimbursed in full. My statement of mistakenly misunderstanding the procedures is in no way offered as an excuse for what happened. It was my way of trying to explain that was never my intent on my part to use public funds improperly. On January 8th of this year, city and county manager reached out to me and made me aware that this procedure was incorrect. I'm thankful for this opportunity to clarify this misunderstanding, as I am embarrassed by the confusion and doubt that it has caused. To clarify a few of the specific concerns. Regarding the extra hotel days, our council travel policy allows family members to travel with us, providing any extra expense are reimbursed. This has been a long-standing policy and practice for many council members going back many, many years. When traveling for the National League of Cities Conference in November, I had the opportunity to arrive 2 days early and attend a football game with my daughter. I made staff aware of those travel arrangements well in advance of the trip and confirmed with them that I would be reimbursing the extra costs for the hotel. Also, to be completely clear and transparent, at no time was my P card used for anything related to those extra days except the hotel. It is my understanding that this was in line with council travel policy, and again, those amounts have been and always were intended to be fully reimbursed. The second issue is related to the food charges. As I mentioned above, I misunderstood a communication from the former finance director on the purchase and reimbursement procedures. I take full responsibility for not clarifying my understanding of those procedures earlier. There also seemed to be a mistaken impression that those charges included large amounts of alcohol. That is not the case. That is because the hotel restaurant at the Tampa Convention Center where has the name, has a word, bar in the name. Both the NACO conference in July and the NLC conference in November were both held at that site. It was a misunderstanding that all those charges were for alcohol. Those charges were for meals while attending the conference. And again, they have been and always were intended to be fully reimbursed by me. There's also a question related to timing. In July, I attended the NACO conference. I returned from that conference on July 16th. On July 23rd, I submitted my receipts to our admin staff per established procedures. In that email, I notified them that I had restaurant charges that exceeded per diem and that I had a check ready to submit for reimbursement. That check was reimbursed shortly thereafter and it cleared my bank account on August 5th. Lastly, related to the timing of receipts and reimbursement for the NLC conference in November. The snow emergency that weekend caused my flight to be canceled twice and rebooked. Ultimately, I arrived in Tampa at 10 p.m. on Friday instead of 9 p.m. on Saturday as originally planned. That emergency, of course, required the need for an unexpected hotel for that night. All hotels within reasonable distance from the convention center were full that night. I was able to get a room at the convention center hotel, but because it was last minute, the price of that night was more than double the conference rate. Knowing that I would be reimbursing the full amount for that night, I used personal Marriott points to pay for most of that night room charge, but they had my P card on file for the rest of the reservation. Something in the split transaction caused an error in their system. My general experience is that when I go to a hotel, I get a receipt of the email, receipt emailed to me right after checkout. For some reason, this did not happen this time. It took me 4 or 5 different times to call the hotel before I finally actually received the email. That was the reason for the delay in getting the receipts to our staff and why there was several emails back and forth with staff regarding those receipts. Even with that, when I submitted the receipts, I proactively calculated the reimbursement amount and let staff know that I would be submitting a check for reimbursement. That said, with the holidays, the submission of that reimbursement check was delayed, and I do take full responsibility for that delay and the issues it caused with our staff. Again, all amounts have been and always were intended to be reimbursed in full. I believe that this was an honest mistake of the procedures, but I absolutely take full responsibility for not clarifying my understanding earlier. It's obviously not at my best in managing this situation. I appreciate the community's understanding that I erred. And again, I apologize for the confusion and doubt that it caused for the community, Mayor Castriota, Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf, my council colleagues, and our dedicated CCOB staff. Being entrusted to represent the people of Broomfield, I hold myself to a high standard and have worked to rectify my error in handling these travel complications. I've had the honor to serve Broomfield residents and my colleagues on several national boards, including leadership positions. I believe those positions bring tremendous value to our community. But I also know that public perception of elected representatives is essential for that trust the residents have placed in us. To that end, I have voluntarily decided that I will no longer be using a P card for travel purposes, and I will rely on staff to manage all future travel expenses. I have already proactively turned the card in to staff. Again, I apologize for the doubt and confusion that my mistake has caused, and I hope this clears up any confusion that has resulted from the incomplete picture of the situation. I know that this likely doesn't ease the public trust issue for many in our community, but I welcome the opportunity to regain that trust through continued and complete transparency and to support whatever actions council deems necessary in the future to strengthen these policies and procedures. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are going to move on to general public comments. And if anybody would like to speak on this item now, you're welcome to. But also in item 5, there'll be an opportunity when we cover the expense report for elected officials. Afterwards, council can make comment statements, ask questions. So, and you can speak then as well. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up for general public comment.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council and staff. Thanks for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Rick Fernandez. I'm a citizen from Broomfield Heights, but I'm also a founding member of an organization called Broomfield Taxpayer Matters, which is a 501c4. We're focused on raising awareness around policies around the city, county, and Broomfield that impact us civically and financially. I appreciate what Councilmember Marsh-Holschen just provided as far as a statement. But I'm here tonight to provide the other side of this story. I'm concerned about what has happened in terms of travel expenses. And the reason that the statement was made this evening was because the information related to this was made available because of a core request related to expenses generally around the council. What I'll say is this. When Councilman Marsh-Holschen was notified by staff about the improper charges from his trip and that he needed to repay $1,621.46 to the city and county of Broomfield, took multiple attempts by staff, 5 different times to get him to repay the amount owed. Once the situation came to light, it was also made clear that the mayor pro tem, and the council member would effectively give him a slap on the wrist and to, quote, handle this internally and without public discussion of council. And now I appreciate again, Councilmember Marsh-Holschen for making his statement. He offered the apology that he read yesterday, indicating it was a misstep, pointing out everything from miscommunications to misunderstandings of the policy to weather to hard to get receipts from the hotel. Quite frankly, that's not acceptable for our elected officials. It's not. It's said that integrity is doing the right thing when no one else is watching. Through these events, and it's clear that Councilman Marsh-Holschen does not exhibit that trait. And further, the handling of the situation by council puts that in question as well. I have 2 questions, one for the city manager and one for the council. Ms. Hoffman, if a Broomfield employee had violated city policy similar to what happened here, would they still be employed by the city and county of Broomfield? The Broomfield Council, if the city manager or the city attorney violated policy for handling funds more than once, would they still be employed by the city and county of Broomfield? Councilman Marsh-Holschen, I appreciate your apology. And you said, and I would just a little latitude here, being entrusted to represent the people of Broomfield, I hold myself to a high standard and work to rectify my error in handling these travel complications. Quite frankly, those are empty words. I don't believe that you worked to rectify the error because you repeated it and then took an exorbitant amount of time to resolve it a second time. I don't trust you, nor should the public trust you that this won't happen again in the future. Taking responsibility includes owning the consequences of your actions. You have hurt the public trust. And in my opinion, it's going to be very hard for you to repair that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, council and staff. I'm Jesse Applegate from Country Estates. I am here to talk about finances, but not the mistakes made by members of council. Instead, I was recently made aware that there was an executive order that demanded the complete cessation of all grants from the federal government to everyone. As this likely affects our finances, as I'm sure we get money from the federal government, advise, as far as a 19-year-old can really advise a city council, that you take an immediate emergency session to figure out where funding is, where it's going, where you're getting it, and what exactly this is going to torpedo. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've lost an inch, so I'm going to have to bring it down a little bit more. I'm Sandy Anderson, the Broadlands, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members, city leadership staff. I'd like to thank you for all you do, as it is well beyond what is understood, acknowledged, and you all deserve our respect and our support. Let me remind you and our Broomfield neighbors that you were voted in. You won your elections and are who we choose to represent us. I'd also like to mention that there is misunderstandings and miscommunications. It's even happened to a member that just spoke earlier when he was unaware why his name was being bantied around news reports for a financial transaction that wasn't considered appropriate for his role in Broomfield GOP or his wife's role. So just to understand, mistakes do happen, errors happen, misunderstandings happen, miscommunication happens. And I appreciate the opportunity that it has been corrected, acknowledged, and extremely discussed. So you have our trust, you have our support, and you have our vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Mayor, Council. My name is Gary Berlin. I live in Anthem Ranch. Had no agenda and no idea what the council member had mentioned earlier. I just want to come here and thank you for what you do for me and for the city of Broomfield. You have a thankless job. You can be certain I wouldn't want it. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciate what you do for me and for the city of Broomfield.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is John Santoro, Ward 4 resident, mayor, council members, city staff. Recent events have come to light that raise 5 questions for all Broomfield businesses, taxpayers, voters, council members, and staff. And while I appreciate the apology, council member Marsh-Holschen, we have some questions here. 1, how can we trust the character, integrity, and honesty of council members with an annual Broomfield budget of over $500 million? Those are taxpayer dollars, not council dollars, when they're brazenly exceed their personal annual spending limits of $6,500, which is generously granted. 2, a retired IRS agent, lady friend of mine, asked, how is this? How did this situation occur? It's a no-brainer to know the difference between business and personal expenses, she having a great deal of experience in this particular area. So how can taxpayers accept the flagrant overspending of personal expenses by council member James Marsh-Holschen during the annual 24 year? And how can we overlook the excesses of 2 other council members, Austin and Henkel? but we could say that it was just a mistake and an apology accepted. But there's something else that plays into this. I was in this chamber 2 weeks ago on the 14th of January, and I just checked to be sure of my information. And these actions do not appear to be an accident or a simple mistake, because Resolution 2025-09 passed. Not unanimously, there were 2 abstentions, but still passed 8-2. And what that resolution said was that if one person overspends and the other person doesn't spend as much, they can borrow and share funds. And I found that to be quite interesting. So a council member could use someone else's money at the taxpayer's largesse. So question 4 is, should we relabel Resolution 2025-09 establishing a council slush fund? Or is the Broomfield taxpayer now just supposed to be council members' personal piggy bank? Because this is just one tiny little look at behavior and integrity. 5, which should conclude. How do we all work together to stop this fiscal mismanagement? We're watching. We're not happy with this. And there are many other issues that are not being addressed right this moment. This must stop, and we must work together to get this stopped and be responsible. Provide the integrity and trust that you promise us, council member. We appreciate your apology. And I thank you all for your good work.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and Council. John E. Walt from Pinnacle North. At the previous council meeting, I made a request of council to please take the time and effort to justify your vote to your constituents and the public at large. I don't expect immediate change, but I would hope that you can see the benefit in doing so and are working toward improvement. I am here today to ask that you put the same effort into your public statements and respect your constituents enough to provide support for your claims you make in public. During that public hearing to modify the expense policy, I used my limited time to speak against modifying the policy, and I believe I supported my position with facts. In one case, I let my feelings rule my choice of language in calling some council members financially illiterate. But the policy was being amended specifically to tell members not to spend money they don't have. So I stand by that characterization. Spending money that you don't have is financial illiteracy, and I would welcome the discussion if anyone disagrees. What I heard in response on this issue from many council members were unsupported statements, mainly around increased transparency and that the public was misinformed. At no point did a council member offer Broomfield specific or logical support for these lines of thinking. I believe most of you truly believe your statements were self-evident and no support was necessary. Could this be because your political and social circles are so insulated that ideas become fact, even when there is plenty of evidence to the contrary? As an example, the amended policy brings no new transparency and actually makes the policy less transparent, not more. Had the original policy been followed, transfers were only supposed to be occurring with council approval. In a council session, one would assume to meet open meeting laws. Now they happen in the dark between 2 members, and a quorum request is required to see the record of the transaction. Words like transparency have meaning, and you cannot simply change the definition to fit your desires. To sum up, I'm tired of being gaslighted. It is reasonable and healthy to have differences of opinion and hold debates on ideas, but that is not what is happening. I choose to believe the gaslighting is not intentional or malicious, but it is happening nonetheless, and I am hopeful that when called on it, changes will be made. I understand that it is easy to fall into the groupthink that leads to gaslighting. If everyone around you is saying the sky is green, you might start to believe it and try to convince others that the sky is green. That certainly doesn't mean that the sky is green. All you have to do is open your eyes. So I ask that moving forward, you make an attempt to compare your statements to reality. If you can support your positions, please do so. If you find that you cannot logically or factually support an idea, then maybe that idea is ripe for change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members, and staff. My name is Janet Sun. I'm from Ward 5. I spoke on this the last time we talked about the expenses. And I mentioned that I had not worked in any company, including the company that you just mentioned about Rocky Flats. I worked for DOE under the legacy management staff up here off of 287. For 4 years, I worked there. I had to go out to the Nevada test site. I had to go to a lot of different events, and we were not allowed to make any additional costs to our expense accounts, nor were we able to share any expenses if they went over. You had a certain amount of money and you had to provide that. So I don't know why the city council thinks that this is a normal process. Any company that I've ever worked for, I've worked for multi-million-dollar companies, and this was not the norm. This never happened. So I think you need to not look at what you're currently doing. I think you need to look outside the box and look at what commercial entities are doing. These things are for profit. The city of Broomfield doesn't seem to be for profit. And I think that the city needs to get in line and start towing the mark.
Thank you.
Roxy Jewell out of La Camara. I guess I missed the last meeting because it was too cold, but I was here the meeting before and I made a statement that somehow raised people's attention, and I ended up with a whole bunch of emails, which actually brought me to what I'm going to talk about tonight. Okay, my statement was the fox in the hen house. So it says, someone has been put in charge of something that is too tempting for them to ignore, as if they were a fox who eats chickens, given the job of protecting the chickens. Another one, someone untrustworthy placed in position of trust in which they will be harmful, damaging, or detrimental for their own personal gain. Another one, don't let the fox guard the hen house. Don't assign a job to someone who will then be in position to exploit it for their own ends. This is said to one who entrusted their monies to a sharper. You guys can look that up. Another one, someone has been put into the position where he or she can then exploit the situation to his or her own benefits. In that case, it's more likely than not that the person in charge absolutely will exploit the situation. Another one, this one came out kind of different. It says the idiom, the fox guarding the hen house, is an old one. It means somebody has been put in charge of something that is too tempting for them to ignore, as if they were the fox who eats chickens, given the job of protecting the chickens. Another one is that is taken to mean placing someone unsuitable in a position of trust, or placing someone in the position of the policing him or herself, and they don't have control of themselves in order to do it. I'm not saying this for just the mayor or the council or the city management and also all the staff. This is our are CCOB people who are running or supposed to be running our city and county. You need to open up your eyes and be here for us, not yourself, not for something that you want to do, but for us. We're the ones that are here. We're taxpayers just like you are. We are homeowners just like you are. And when you hurt us, you hurt yourself. And when you make us look bad, you look bad too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one person on the phone who wants to comment, so we'll go over to our caller next. Lois, you're on and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Lois Vanderkoy, Broomfield Heights, getting over a cold. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hello? Okay. Trump's negative reaction to the Episcopal bishop's sermon about mercy, dignity, honesty, and humility says a lot about his psychopathology and what we are facing as a nation and community. I know that you received similar reactions from some community members. I'm sorry you are disparaged by some for what you do rather than given constructive criticism and ideas to solve real problems involving housing, health, climate change, discrimination, income disparities, and accountability. They're like sharks hungry for blood. They seek the splinters in your eyes while there is a beam in their own. Trump can easily be diagnosed as having personality disorders with his malignant narcissism and sociopathy. The diagnoses speak to a primitive way of dealing with reality: denial, splitting into we're all good and you're all bad, projection of one's fear and hatred onto others to dehumanize them and distract from one's own shortcomings, rejecting expertise, facts, and laws that challenge grandiose attachment to wealth and power, and inciting violence through lies and lawlessness. No ability to understand one's inner states or others' needs and emotions. No empathy. No remorse or acceptance of mistakes and wrongdoing, unlike councilmember Marsh-Holschen, who has a conscience and is working to make amends. As a country, we are full-blown with the psychopathology operating at the highest levels, and I encourage you to keep functioning as thoughtful, honest, and humble human beings who can deal with the complexities of meeting community needs with care rather than with hatred and black-white thinking. Maybe with their vigilance, some in our community should apply to replace the 18 inspector generals that Trump fired illegally. Yes, I'm angry and scared about how Trump and his loyalists are destroying the institutions of our country, which granted can always use oversight and improvement, but usually administer with lawfulness, integrity, and care. Thank you.
I have a statement. I want to make clear that I find Councilmember Marsh-Holshen's expenditures and his choice to make personal charges on his P card unacceptable, as was the delay in responding to staff and the delay in reimbursing these funds. This is not an employee situation. However, as elected officials, we owe a duty to the public and to council as a body to hold each other accountable. We might be constrained by what is in our current rules, but we should and can call out unacceptable behavior when we see it. I would like to hear from my council colleagues on this matter before I comment further. So if anyone on council would like to speak. Councilmember Leslie.
Thank you, Mayor. In my role as president of colleges, public colleges, I had to deal with P card issues quite a bit, often with my own trustees. And so I know that using a P card requires a lot of discipline, focus, and integrity. That's why I never used a P card. Not that I didn't have integrity, but because I didn't want to have to deal with the challenges of managing a P card vis-a-vis your own purchasing, as well as working with the staff to make sure everything was always clear at the end of it. So the point I'm making is just I'm familiar with these kinds of issues happening often because communication often is a challenge. Nevertheless, the actions, as the mayor just said, were inappropriate. Tonight's not the night for me to make a proposed motion, but when the appropriate time comes, I will do so, asking staff to please clarify the procedure for council, not just for employees, but for council. What is the proper procedure? And what would be the disciplinary requirements should that procedure be abridged? We don't have that authority as council right now because there's nothing that says that we have the right to discipline one of our colleagues. But I think in this case, it's appropriate for us to also be trained. So that would be the third element of what I will be recommending. Again, tonight's not the night to make that motion, but it will come shortly and I'll be prepared to do so. So thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other colleagues have any remarks, comments? Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, I do have a P card, and as part of the requirement for receiving a P card, we had to do training. So that goes into the whole part. If you don't want to do the training, you don't want to agree to it, you don't take the P card. I very much remember that. I have used mine responsibly, and it's not hard to follow those instructions, and I will leave it at that. And I am happy to discuss this further and how we hold each other accountable. I just don't have the answers tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. I first just want to explain some things about the budget that I think is just for some reason not clarified yet. And I believe I've mentioned this 2 times already. What I'm not hearing up here and that I should be hearing is a repetitive thought of knowing and acknowledging the fact that there are some people on council that have different roles. And I've explained this 2 to 3 times. Those different roles are either CCI, NACO. I am required this Thursday and Friday to be down in Denver all day. We're voting. That's part of my job. It's part of what people elected me on this city council to do. I know that there are other jobs that other people have. So therefore, either travel and or time that we have, that is our job. And so that's why you see just differences in funding. Where some people, like for instance, Councilmember Leslie, he serves on the chamber. He could probably, if he was going to these meetings in person, turn in some sort of transportation, maybe to and from, maybe mileage, not really sure. But a lot of these too that you can attend online too. So obviously I don't put mileage if I'm attending a meeting online. I just want to make sure that people know that. And on different boards, that is seen throughout the United States. If you have different roles, you have different funding mechanisms. I would like to, in the future, address that because we aren't in charge of what the $6,000 was. We've never set that. I think it was set about 12 years ago. So that's not something that we've even set for ourselves. So that deserves a conversation in the future. As far as P cards go, I actually don't even use one. I just turn in my receipts of what I've used. I usually use things like Uber if I'm traveling somewhere. And that's usually the receipts that I get back. Yeah, I appreciate any transparency and if there's anything that we can do in the future to make it even more transparent, I'm all for it. Thanks.
Councilmember Lim.
After reviewing the P card handbook, I would like to know if we could possibly have staff comment on whether the procedures were followed as set up in the P card document. My understanding of the violation policy and the levels of enforcement are that the P card handbook policy was followed. I also think that there's room for improvement possibly in the P card handbook. Certainly, my reading of the P card handbook is that there was no statement in that handbook as to whether there should be only an internal discussion, or if there should be a public discussion. That was not addressed as I read the P card handbook in one way or another. But I would like to see an update, revision to the P card handbook so that it is clear that it could be a discussion that possibly at least why you get to a level 2 violation, that it becomes council and public knowledge. Because this certainly, just to make clear, was not known to council, the rest of council, and certainly wasn't known to the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have some questions both for staff as well as Councilmember Marsh-Holschen. So first question for staff, when did council members start having access to the CCOB issued P cards?
Excuse me, not long after COVID.
In the years since P cards were being issued, how many violations have occurred with P cards for council members?
I'm trying to be very, usually I say I'm not being coy and I'm trying to be diplomatic. But I'm not being coy and I'm trying to be diplomatic. We have not seen this issue before.
Attorney Rogers, can you speak to the changes being considered in the P card and expense policy in light of the recent events?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf. One of the challenges in this situation is that the P card handbook, the policy is written for employees. And it's written with up to and including termination. That's something all of us are familiar with as employees. The progressive discipline that Councilmember Lim mentioned, the lack of this issue being public, because personnel matters under Colorado state law for public employees are private matters. So we have talked about creating a council member addendum to the handbook that's specific about elected officials' use. This is a person that cannot be disciplined by the body. They're not an employee. They can't be terminated. And it's a different situation than employees. So that is what we've been discussing, my office with CMO and with the finance department. On the other hand, or another avenue we've been discussing is there's a P card agreement for any of us that when we get a P card, we sign a P card agreement. It's sort of in exchange for this privilege, you have to sign this agreement. That agreement is also written with employees in mind. So modifying that to address council, where we can talk about notification from staff to the city manager and the city attorney, and then our notification to council when there's issues with a council member's expenditures, because right now it's just not addressed. So those are a couple of the changes where we've been talking about.
Have all the 2024 receipts for P card use been submitted? Councilmember Marsh-Holschen.
Absolutely.
Have all 2024 reimbursements for unauthorized P card use been submitted and verified? And that's kind of a question for Councilmember Marsh-Holschen as well, staff.
They've been
submitted.
Submitted, and the last one has already cleared my bank account. So yes.
Those have been
And I can provide, screenshot of that obviously.
We received a check on January the 14th. We don't know if it's cleared.
What occurred with Councilmember Marsh-Holshen's P card usage in July and then again in November of 2024 were violations of the P card policy and the expense policy. Staff alerted me of this issue in early January and requested the assistance of the mayor and I to get the reimbursements and receipts submitted as soon as possible so the end of year financials could be completed. In addition to getting these items submitted, I also wanted to prevent any further expenses from occurring, hence the agreement to suspend the P cards and schedule additional training. After getting the agreement for these items, I was told by Councilmember Marsh-Holschen he would be making a public statement during the council meeting on January 14, 2025 to inform council and the public. This, of course, did not happen. I then became ill shortly after and even missed last week's study session. I'm glad to hear Councilmember Marsh-Holschen will be turning in his P card. I would also suggest that Councilmember Marsh-Holschen reconsider future travel while trust is rebuilt with council and with the public and with staff. Those are my comments for now. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have one question for staff in light of Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf's question about policy for P card usage. Mr. Rogers, you stated that you are working with the CMO office, or the city manager's office, I should say, in developing potentially an addendum to the employee version of the P card handbook or an agreement. Why was that not done originally in let's just say 2021 for simplification, when council members started having access to P cards?
I have two thoughts on this, and it's hard to go back 2020 and wish shoulda, coulda, woulda. Now we know a situation as arose. We thought it was clear.
Okay. I mean, obviously 2020 is, hindsight is 2020. We all wish we could make mistakes or do mistakes differently, make different choices. It's sad that this event is what necessitated the need for a reanalysis of the P card agreements for the mayor and city council members, but I'm happy that that is being dealt with your office and the city and county manager's office.
Thank you.
Didn't have one, but I assume it's the same as what I had in many cases where it's treated as a confidential staff matter. So if in my previous employment, if I had an issue, it was not something I shared with the rest of the staff. It was handled on a one-on-one with my employee to rectify if there was a mistake.
And the 12 of you, you are a very different type of entity, individual for the city and county. I will tell you the draft that we've been working on does have reporting to both myself and to the city manager, and then our obligation to report back to council in a public meeting related to P card uses and any violations that we might see, inadvertent or non-inadvertent.
Are you going to speak again? Is that?
Yeah, just one.
Okay, one more thing. No, that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So I would suggest in light of the recent events, the P card agreements for elected officials need to be updated along with that handbook. There needs to be more communication and less discretion for the strict compliance and enforcement of these agreements and the privileges that are associated with the use of a purchasing card. Because the mayor and council are public officials, the communication of violations needs to be communicated to council at the next public meeting after the violation has occurred. And I would even go on to suggest that any violation needs to be immediate termination of the elected official's P card. Thank you, Mayor.
I want to thank my colleagues for their comments and the community for the emails. And I hope you heard, like I did, a commitment to move toward greater public accountability. Serving on council is a privilege. Traveling while representing and damage the public trust. The simplicity, as he said in an email about his hotel bill, is no justification in my mind, nor is his explanation on the ability to reimburse the city and county. I received the same email that Councilmember Marsh-Holschen is relying on to support his belief that reimbursement was acceptable. I don't agree. The finance director said we could not get a per diem and also use a P card for food. And if that occurred, then reimbursement would be required. It was not permission for unauthorized purchases on a P card, so long as reimbursement occurred. It is a way to fix what is a true mistake or accidental overage. I and almost all of my current and prior council colleagues are well aware of the rules. No personal purchases to be paid with city and county funds. No alcohol to be purchased with city and county funds, even as part of a meal. The view that staff didn't tell me it was wrong, so it must have been right, is an excuse that diminishes our duty to use public funds responsibly. We are expected to exercise the same care and incur expenses that a prudent person would exercise if traveling on personal business and expending personal funds. To our staff, I want to thank you for bringing this to our attention, and I assure the public that there are no ramifications for their reporting. Please continue to report these issues. Our administrative staff does a great job of keeping track of travel plans, following up on receipts, and tracking council's use of travel and training funds on the expense spreadsheet linked to tonight's agenda. When myself and Mayor Pro Tem first learned of this situation from the city and county manager, we worked to find a way to effectively address it and unfortunately found a gap in our policies and enforcement tools. Council's expense policy doesn't address the use of a P card or reimbursement practice like this. And the city's P card policy is written for traditional employees, not council members, so there's no authority for us to enforce it. We knew it was important that councilmember Marsh-Holschen stop the behavior and reimburse CCOB immediately. Therefore, utilizing the consequences for employees laid out in the P card manual, we suggested and councilmember Marsh-Holschen agreed to a 30-day suspension of the P card. And with his statement, he will relinquish his P card permanently. Additional training has occurred and will occur with the city and county attorney. Forward-looking, that's not enough. Council cannot fire an elected official, and none of us are the boss of the others. But council can assist staff with stricter policies and tighter procedures on our own expenditures so that future councils and future staff have the right tools in place to take swift action when these issues arise. Council as a body can hold each other accountable. To that end, the city and county attorney has begun revisions to the P card agreement that any council member who uses a P card must sign that will make crystal clear that no personal purchases or ineligible purchases are allowed on a P card. Reimbursement is not a justification for personal purchases on a P card. Any improper uses of P cards will be reported to council in a public meeting and will result in immediate termination of those privileges. Any improper use will be considered a violation of council's expense policy. Further, I'll be asking for changes to council's expense policy to lay out similar clarifications so that there can be no misunderstanding in the future. I will also ask for the addition of a provision that council will have the power to revoke a council member's travel and training budget if there are any violations. Councilmember Marsh-Holschen, I'll take you at your word that this was a misunderstanding. This was a serious mistake by you. To use a phrase I use often, you know better, you do better. That's all I have to say. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, this statement isn't prepared. Again, I apologize for the mistake and the appearance that it provided to everyone that I was doing things improperly and that there was no intent. But I take full responsibility for it, and I fully support all of these comments up here about continued transparency and enhanced transparency and changing the rules, and I fully support those. And as I said before, I look forward to moving forward and to regaining everyone's trust. Thank you.
Councilmember Marsh-Holschen.